The Grand Canyon is a breathtaking location that draws millions of visitors. While these visitors are rightly impressed by the vastness of the canyon, there have been discoveries in the canyon that will shock them even more. Popular podcaster Joe Rogan has brought guests on his show to talk up these discoveries, and things get explosive. What has been discovered in the Grand Canyon, and why is it shocking? In this video, Joe Rogan and his guest reveal terrifying discoveries at the Grand Canyon that change everything. American President Teddy Roosevelt once called the Grand Canyon one of the great natural wonders that every American should see. Underscoring the magnificence of the canyon, on February 26, 1919, Congress reinforced Roosevelt's travel recommendation by making the Arizona Canyon a national park.
People travel to see the Grand Canyon.
Like, dude, you gotta go to the Grand Canyon, man. Dude, it changed my life, man. I stood out there and saw that canyon. It was so immense. I just realized, well, how small my role in the universe really is. Oh, really? Wow.
Guess who else agrees the Grand Canyon is a must-see for everybody? That is popular podcaster Joe Rogan. With researchers being active in the Grand Canyon, many people think there is nothing new to be discovered. However, the canyon is a gift that keeps on giving, and many things we now know about the place continue to shock us. One such discovery is the evidence of the presence of Egyptians in the Grand Canyon. We know what you were thinking. Egypt is in Africa and the Grand Canyon is located in North America. Both places are separated by 12,000 kilometers, with a large portion of it being the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. But the evidence that has turned up that the Egyptians visited the Grand Canyon is pretty convincing. Joe Rogan brought on Hotep Jesus on his show, who spoke about findings by the Smithsonian Institution about the activities of the ancient Egyptians in the Grand Canyon, proving that these ancient North Africans somehow found their way to this massive canyon in North America.
Yeah, the Smithsonian published some stuff in 1909,
wow.
I guess, that where all this came from. There was an article that got written.
You might not know this, but pyramids and caves containing hieroglyphics and Egyptian relics can be found in a restricted area of the Grand Canyon. The reason many people are unaware of them is that the authorities have kept this information hidden for nearly a century. The sky over this area is restricted airspace. The area surrounding this pyramid and cave on the ground is illegal and treacherous to navigate, and all official Smithsonian and other reports about this have been censored, modified, nullified, or retracted. And yet, despite this, people continue to attempt to visit this section of the canyon. Over the years, many people have been arrested and some have died while attempting to reach these sacred sites. There is a cave known as Kincaid's Cave, which was named after G. Kincaid, the cave's first explorer. G. Kincaid worked as an archaeologist for S.A. Jordan after leaving the Marines. The Smithsonian Institute dispatched S.A. Jordan to the Grand Canyon to investigate information reported by John Wesley Powell. The tunnel is currently located 400 feet above the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon on a cliff wall. Archaeologists believe the man-made cavern dates back around 3,000 years. This cavern is over 500 feet long and has several cross-tunnels leading to large chambers. This was the Grand Canyon's lowest level and the final Egyptian tunnel city. Archaeologists estimate that the Colorado River has eroded 300 feet lower since it was built. Many Egyptian relics were discovered in Kincaid's Cave, including a pure gold artifact for the Egyptian king Kion. The relic has lotus flowers in both hands native to Egypt. This was discovered in the cave's first cross-tunnel, which was in the exact same location as the shrines in the Valley of the King's Tunnel cities before ancient Egypt's kings began to build pyramids and above-ground cities. Kion was discovered to be a descendant of King Zaphnat of Egypt, who may have been Joseph in the Bible. This Egyptian golden tablet was also discovered deep within the tunnel city connected by Kincaid's Cave. This tablet serves as a history book with names beginning with King Zaphnat's arrival in Aztlan and information about his descendant King Kion's arrival in the Grand Canyon. Some of the only historical artifacts from the Grand Canyon on display at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. are the pure gold artifacts from Kincaid's Cave and the Egyptian urns from Powell's Cave. So what happened to the rest of them? Who knows what wasn't photographed and documented, but at least some of them were. There's a reason why other relics discovered here aren't on display. John Wesley Powell was the first American explorer archaeologist to search the Grand Canyon, partnering with a native Jacob Vernon Hamblin, both pictured here, who served in place of his late partner for the expedition. Powell worked for the U.S. Department of the Interior as an explorer and archaeologist, and was the director of the Smithsonian Institution's Bureau of Ethnology. Powell traveled down the Green River to explore the Grand Canyon in 1869. He was the first person to report any archaeological information to the U.S. government about the Grand Canyon's natives and their history. Powell's cave was discovered by John Wesley Powell. The following is a direct quote from a book written by Powell. "In this canyon, great numbers of man-made caves are hollowed out. I first walked down a gorge to the left of a cliff and climbed to a bench of the cliff. There was a trail on the cliff bench that was deeply worn into the rock formation. Where the trail crossed some gulches, some steps had been cut. I could see no evidence that the trail had been traveled in a long time. I returned to our camp about 3 p.m. and the men had found more Egyptian hieroglyphics on cliff walls near the cave. We explored the cave and found this shrine and other artifacts. That evening, I sent a team member to notify the Smithsonian Institute of our discovery. We continued to survey the canyon and discovered more Egyptian tunnel cities. I estimate in my report that I think upwards of 50,000 Egyptians had inhabited the Grand Canyon at one time." Powell and his team also discovered a shrine in Powell's cave. This was discovered to be a shrine for Smenkhkare. King Smenkhkare was King Akhenaten's son, who began his reign in 1336 BC at Saqqara. The Giza pyramids do, the constellations Orion and Pleiades. And here is Hotep Jesus describing another connection between the Grand Canyon and ancient Egypt.
What's up?
The thing I found about the Egyptians in Ohio was actually from a paper that was written. It's postulating it. I guess they took a lot of the evidence that they had been finding and saying this shows that there might have actually been Egyptians there.
Yep, sandblast, which is plentiful in the Grand Canyon. You would be surprised by how important sandblasting was to the ancient builders in Egypt. Without these materials, they would not have been able to move the vast slabs that made up these massive structures. So how did sandblasting help to move heavy objects without the assistance of modern technology? For years, researchers have attempted to solve the mystery of the ancient Egyptian pyramids. Aside from the magnificent architecture, scientists have long wondered how the Egyptians moved those massive pyramid stones, some of which weighed several tons. Researchers now believe that the stones were dragged across wet sand. Their study, titled Sliding Friction on Wet and Dry Sand, was published in the journal Physical Review Letters and is based on a wall painting from Jehuti-Hotep's tomb, which depicts a person standing in front of a wooden sled and wetting the sand. Daniel Bon, a physics professor at the University of Amsterdam and the paper's lead author, says that after discovering the painting, he and his team conducted a laboratory experiment in which they built a smaller version of the Egyptian sled in a tray of sand, with the weights ranging from 100 grams to a few kilograms. When the sand dried, a sand heap formed in front of the sled, impeding its movement. The sled required a relatively high force to reach a steady state. Adding water stiffened the sand, and the heaps shrank in size until no heap formed in front of the moving sled, and thus a lower applied force was required to reach a steady state. The trick is to use the least amount of water possible. The sled's movement would be hampered if the sand was too dry or too wet, according to Dr. Bon. Dry sand, as we all know, does not make good sandcastles. However, adding water changes the equation and solves the problem. When there is enough water, these bridges act like glue, holding the grains together. This is great for sandcastle construction and, as it turns out, sand transportation. Less force on wet sand means that the number of men needed to pull the stones could be cut in half, according to Bon. The Egyptians were most likely aware of this useful trick. And wetting the sand has long been associated with a ritual. Bon adds that the purpose of this study is to refute that viewpoint. According to Bon, based on the type of jar seen in the wall painting, the man was using water rather than oil or any other lubricant. However, according to other researchers, Egyptians also used desert clay as a lubricant. According to Mark Lehner, director of Ancient Egypt Research Associates, ERA, thin Tafla clay layers have been discovered beneath multi-ton blocks that were either left in place at the wall of a temple or other monument, or where workers left the blocks en route and not yet in their intended place in a building. Lehner said he had seen blocks left in such frozen moments on the sand. He added that to make the final slide, an adjustment in to fit with an adjacent block so fine you cannot get a knife or even a razor blade in between, the builders used at millimeters thin layers of whitish-pink gypsum mortar, finer even than Tafla, on the pyramid casings. Dr. Lehner witnessed it firsthand while working on the WGBH NOVA program, in which he and his team created a hauling track made of wood beams, sand, and limestone debris, and then coated it with Tafla, an Arabic word for calcareous desert clay. They had workers pull a 2-ton limestone block on a wooden sled while another worker sprayed or poured water in front of the sled's runners to wet the clay. He was crouched and moving backward as the sled progressed. The slick clay acted as a lubricant, making it much easier to pull the block. Lehner, however, admits the sand was not the only material used. For longer, coarser movements, sand could have been used. Because Tafla is fine, it would have been used for shorter, more precise movements and adjustments, whereas gypsum mortar, which is possibly even finer than Tafla, would have been used for the most precise adjustments, setting the outer casing stones. And back to the Grand Canyon, among the new discoveries are updated ages of one of the canyon's most important rock layers, a discovery that shifts key points in the canyon's geologic history. Researchers are also debating the canyon's age as well as what its future might hold in the face of climate change. The canyon's history is complex. It was first encountered by humans around 12,000 years ago as the first Americans spread across the continent. A few Spanish explorers began passing through by the 16th century. In May 1869, John Wesley Powell, a one-armed Civil War veteran and future head of the U.S. Geological Survey, led 9 men on an unprecedented boating expedition down the Colorado River. His reports from that trip, as well as a second 2 years later, helped establish the Grand Canyon as a national icon and natural wonder. Today, the Grand Canyon receives 6 million visitors per year, making it the second most visited national park in the United States, trailing only the much more accessible Great Smoky Mountains. Tourists flock here to marvel at the canyon's jaw-dropping size and the sheer spectacle of how the Colorado River carved through layer after layer of rock to reveal an ombre of reds, browns, pinks, purples, and other colors. When 2 plates of Earth's crust collided nearly 2 billion years ago, the Grand Canyon was formed. Rows of volcanic islands collided and merged as they came together. Under extreme heat and pressure, their rocks transformed into the dark-colored basement rocks seen near the canyon's bottom today, including 1.84 billion-year-old Elves Chasm gneiss, the canyon's oldest known. But the Grand Canyon's geological history is missing after that, between approximately 1.75 billion and 1.25 billion years ago. Erosion wiped out rocks from that time period like chapters from a history book. The story resumes between 1.25 billion and 730 million years ago when new layers of rock, known as the Grand Canyon supergroup, began to form intermittently. Sediments drifted to the bottom of prehistoric seas and hardened, forming layers such as a 1.25 billion-year-old limestone studded with algae fossils, the canyon's earliest life recorded. The supergroup layers were eventually broken up and tilted at an angle by geological forces. They were scoured by erosion and another sea formed on top of them. New sediment began to settle out at the sea's bottom, which surprised Karlstrom and his colleagues recently. They decided to examine mineral fragments from the 60-mile formation, one of the rock layers. It had never been precisely dated before, but it was thought to be approximately 650 million years old. However, the minerals study revealed that it was only 508 million years old. That means the 60-mile formation is part of the younger Grand Canyon supergroup rather than the older Grand Canyon supergroup. Karlstrom's team can now use the new dates to better understand how quickly the flooding occurred and how quickly other rock layers atop the 60-mile formation formed. And ocean-fed sediments continued to accumulate over the next hundreds of millions of years. Various shimmering colors date from this time period, which occurred between 508 million and 270 million years ago. John Strong Newberry, the first geologist to explore the canyon in 1857, described it as the most splendid exposure of stratified rock that there is in the world. And the cream-colored Kaibab limestone, which is relatively young at 270 million years old, sits atop everything at the canyon's rim. It had taken eons, but by this point, all of the canyon's rock layers had been formed. They simply had to be made visible. And that part of the story began around 70 million years ago when two plates of Earth's crust collided and began to push up the Rocky Mountains. What is now known as the Four Corners region of the southwestern United States, more broadly known as the Colorado Plateau, began to rise, rising from near sea level to thousands of feet in elevation. The Colorado River was formed around 6 million years ago by waters rushing off the Rockies. As the plateau rose, the river carved the canyon over time. Smaller rivers eventually carved the canyon's side canyons, mesas, and buttes that we see today. However, this story's timing has not been agreed upon by all geologists. Some argue that the canyon is as much as 70 million years old, based on how long certain rock minerals appear to have been exposed at the surface in parts of the canyon. However, while some parts of the canyon are older, the river system as a whole did not become connected and flowing until around 6 million years ago. And the human story began as the geological story of the canyon came to an end. People first arrived in the Americas around 12,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age. They were living in and around the canyon around 10,000 years ago, hunting enormous, now extinct beasts like the Shasta sloth. And people living in the canyon more recently created and left split-twig animal figurines that have been dated to around 4,000 years ago. And people were growing crops along the canyon bottom 1,000 years ago and storing their harvests in shelters hollowed out of the walls, some of which are still visible today. Today, at least 12 Native American tribes live in or near the canyon, but their lives are vastly different from those of previous generations. The US government, for example, restricted the Havasupai to a small reservation at the canyon's bottom in 1882. Instead of moving seasonally to areas where game was plentiful, the Havasupai were forced to make a living in the canyon year-round. Another discovery made in the Grand Canyon is shockingly old, in fact, more than 300 million years old. Actually, finding fossil footprints in the Grand Canyon is not unusual. The vast expanse of red rock is home to a variety of formations containing preserved remnants of the past. But a geology professor's discovery proved to be more significant than he could have imagined. He discovered the oldest vertebrate fossil tracks ever discovered at Grand Canyon National Park, dating back 313 million years. According to a park news release, geologist Alan Krill, a visiting professor from Norway at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, discovered a boulder marked with a set of fossil footprints while on a walk with students. Krill sent a photo of the tracks to colleague Stephen Rowland, a paleontologist who was intrigued by his discovery. Rowland and his colleagues detailed their discovery in a paper published in the journal PLOS One. Rowland said these are by far the oldest vertebrate tracks in the Grand Canyon, which is known for its abundance of fossil tracks. They are among the oldest shelled egg-laying animal tracks on Earth, as well as the earliest evidence of vertebrate animals walking in sand dunes. A cliff collapse exposed the boulder containing the fossil tracks. It was right alongside a trail but had gone unnoticed until Krill brought it to the attention of geologists. The footprints showed two separate animals passing on the slope of a sand dune, according to the researchers. The footprint pattern revealed a distinct gait in early animals that scientists were unaware of. A lateral sequence walk involves the rear leg and front leg on one side of the animal moving together, followed by those legs on the opposite side moving together. When walking slowly, living species of tetrapods such as dogs and cats use a lateral sequence gait. The Bright Angel trail tracks show that this gait was used very early in the history of vertebrate animals. We previously had no knowledge of this. Scientists have also discovered the, science behind our fascination with the Grand Canyon. If you have ever visited this popular landmark or seen pictures and were awed, there is finally a scientific explanation for why you had the exhilarating experience. This type of heady reaction is nearly universal, spanning age, culture, and socioeconomic status. Lani Chiota, an associate professor of social psychology at Arizona State University, is an expert on the emotion of awe. Chiota's research is aimed at uncovering the mysteries of emotion, including its very purpose, and she has made some intriguing discoveries. For starters, awe is almost certainly a uniquely human experience. The capacity for awe relies on something that humans are certainly best at, and that is forming an internal mental representation of things and people in the world. It is an important part of how we survive. Humans have relied on mental maps of the world based on prior experiences to guide us safely through new and unexpected situations and territory for centuries. So when we see something we've never seen before, it's in our best interest to learn as much as we can about it so that we can add it to our internal mental schema and be better prepared for something similar in the future. Researchers are still investigating how the emotion of awe allows this to occur, but they believe it alters our information processing. When you're in awe, your mind is telling you that previous experiences you've had don't always apply. What it is doing is promoting a cognitive and behavioral state, and possibly even a physiological state that makes it easier for you to take in information. As you stop moving, your attention shifts from yourself, your daily priorities, or whatever was on your mind just before, to be entirely focused on this awe-inspiring thing in front of you, whatever that may be. And in fact, listening to some ASU students describe their Grand Canyon experiences provides compelling evidence to support that theory. Ethan Hetrick, a physics junior, has been to the canyon several times. When asked how he felt, he said his senses kind of get clearer. It was almost as if he was more aware of what he was feeling at the time. He claimed he could see a little better now and he was more aware of what was going on around him. Scioto investigated the effects of awe on information processing in the laboratory by exposing subjects to an awe-inducing stimulus, then having them read a story about a romantic dinner and asking them to recall specific details afterward. She discovered that if people had been exposed to an awe-inspiring stimulus before reading the story, they were less likely to add details from their internal mental schemas of what a romantic dinner should include. For example, when asked if there was a candle on the table in the story, subjects who had not been exposed to an awe-inspiring stimulus frequently remembered that there was a candle, even though the story made no mention of a candle. People who had been exposed to awe-inspiring stimuli prior to reading the story were less likely to make that error. That told Scioto that they were paying more attention to the information in the story. Now, the reasons for people's awe vary, but panoramic nature views and the Grand Canyon itself are high on the list. Right now, the most widely accepted definition of awe in literature involves encountering a stimulus, something very large, very fast, with very vast implications that do not map onto the knowledge that we've already interpreted about the world around us. However, people have also described art, music, dance, and social interactions as inspiring. In fact, anything that challenges our worldview or presents us with something new and complicated and difficult to grasp, but also is valuable, can cause us to feel awe. But what if you don't feel awe during a visit to the Grand Canyon? Well, you might be one of the few outliers who are resistant to feeling awe. Scioto believes it could be due to a variety of factors, including overexposure to a particular stimulus or a willingness to admit, either consciously or subconsciously, that they are unfamiliar with something. And awe is more than just a mental experience for those who have it. Scioto's lab has measured people's physiological responses to awe-inducing stimuli. Awe appears to have a calming effect, in contrast to other positive emotions that cause arousal in the form of increased heart rate, dilated pupils, and other such symptoms. So you should try feeling awed sometime. Would you be awed by the Grand Canyon or not? Let's hear in the comments section below.
Welcome to the majestic wonder of the world, the Grand Canyon. Stretching over 277 miles, this awe-inspiring natural masterpiece carved by the Colorado River offers a glimpse into the Earth's remarkable geological history. The Grand Canyon's iconic beauty is not just about its immense size, it's also a geological time capsule. Each layer of rock tells a story spanning millions of years, revealing the planet's ever-changing landscapes. Hikers and adventurers flock here to experience its grandeur up close. But did you know that the Grand Canyon is also home to a rich ecosystem? From bighorn sheep to California condors, diverse wildlife thrives in this rugged terrain. As the sun sets over the canyon, painting the sky with vibrant hues, it's a reminder of the timeless beauty that captivates millions of visitors each year. The Grand Canyon is more than a tourist destination. It's a testament to the Earth's power and resilience. Whether you're hiking along its trails, admiring its stunning vistas, or simply reflecting on its majesty, this natural wonder will leave an indelible mark on your soul. Subscribe to our channel to discover more wonders of the world and embark on unforgettable adventures. Don't miss out on the breathtaking beauty that awaits. Hit that subscribe button now